mentors and colleagues from the NCR from all over the world to present an old and a new topic, which is the bladder preservation. And if I'm to be excused from my dear Professor Dr. Hussein Khalid, ex-Minister of Higher Education, and Professor Gurbel from Germany to start the session. Bladder preservation is not a new technique. As we know that over the past decade, multimodality treatment or sphincter sparing treatment have been the standard of care for breast, larynx, rectum, and nip sparing procedures, but in the context of that the survivor should not be compromised and with a better or an equal quality of life with an effective salvage treatment. The strengthening of the argument about the bladder preservation started by the RTOG, the Mass General Hospital, University of Erlangen in Germany, and University of Paris in France. And all of these were speaking about the maximum TURBT, transthoracic resection of the bladder tumor, then to be followed by radio and chemotherapy. From the radiation biology point of view, because radiation is an integral component in the management of bladder cancer, there is a combination between cellular repopulation, cellular radioresistance, intrinsic radioresistance, and tumor hypoxia, and that's why the role of radiotherapy only was not famous. So that's why the use of some hyperbaric oxygen or hypoxic radiosensitizers, chemical radiosensitization like chemotherapeutic agents, combination of biological modifiers, using an alternative of conventional fractionation radiation might counterbalance the cellular repop, and targeted therapy might all add to a survival benefit. So the ideal clinical selection criteria, should be studied by heart, should be early tumor stage, a high risk T1 disease, and we know that's T1 disease, or T2 less than 5 centimeter, which means an inner muscle invasion. And a visibly complete TURBT might take this out, but leave behind a tumor. So when you are dealing with bladder preservation, you are dealing with a residual disease, not microscopic disease. Absence of carcinoma in situ and return obstruction and adequate bladder capacity and function is mandatory because radiation might cause some bladder dysfunction. So this algorithm, just to show you that the bladder strategies, involves maximum TURBT and one of three options. Either neoadjuvant chemotherapy, then systemic assessment, radical radiotherapy, FCR, or cystectomy if there always, or short induction, then assessment, radiochemo, or radical cystectomy for not less than CR, or then evaluation after radiochemotherapy and consolidation radiochemotherapy, or upfront radiochemo, all through, and then consolidation radiochemotherapy. For those who are ineligible for cystectomy or patient preference, then we are left with TURBT, and then radiation therapy 40 grade combined with chemo, imaging, and plus translator resection bladder tumor evaluation, and then either to go for salvage cystectomy again if less than CR, or complete the protocol. Or you can go for combined chemoradio and then surveillance, or radiotherapy alone, which is the least choice to be done with, unless the patient is chemo-free. So this is just to show you the rationale of using the adjuvant chemotherapy in the perioperative cisplatin era, and the MCV is the best choice to be used, and this is for almost 1,000 patients with a survival benefit. So the MCV was the treatment choice used in 5 randomized induction chemoradiotherapy trials, but here they are using up to T4A patients with an induction 2 cycles only, not more. Then chemoradio, then we have a PCR of 60 to 75 with the 5-year overall survival ranging from 50 to 60, and the 5-year bladder preservation of intake bladder from 35 to 45. Again, the combined chemoradiotherapy only, there was 11 trials, and again up to T4A, and this is the 2 biggest trials, and you can see that the 5-year survival was in the range of 50 to 55, again with an intake bladder up to 42%. So this was in the 2001, they used the accelerated fractionation, as we said, to counterbalance the accelerated repop, and we find that a limited number of patients, but the accelerated therapy was there. That's why the RTOG, when we see, they used an accelerated hypofractionated regimen rather than conventional fractionation. The loop region control was almost 60% at 3 years, but the overall survival was not that good, around the 20%, and the T2, of course, was better than the T4. So this is just to show you that the RTOG had 6 trials, pooled analysis, and it's in a 3 or 5 years era. They started by the neoadjuvant chemo followed by concomitant chemorad, then neoadjuvant chemo and concomitant chemorad again, but this was randomized. And then in 1997, they used the concomitant chemorad followed with hyperfractionated radiotherapy. And again, hyperfractionated therapy, but with a different dose schedule. And in the year 2000, they used concomitant and hyperfractionated followed by adjuvant. So every time there is a change, now they are using the CCRT plus adjuvant chemotherapy using an altered fractionation schedule to counterbalance for the accelerated epoch. This is the pooled analysis. The 5 and 10 years survival, disease-specific rate were about 65% at 10 years. So the update analysis is that we have a 10-year survival for bladder preservation. Distal metastasis in the range of 35 and 10 years. And would this ask for more chemo or no? It's a matter of debate. Overall survival, again, around 40%, 10 years survival with the concomitant chemoradiation. And of the 205 patients alive at 5 years, 80% had an intact bladder. This is just to show you that T2 fared better than T3 and 4, and the complete responder fared better than the non-responders. Again, from the MGH, big experience. Again, CR after CCRT at the median of 7.7 years, they have 78% CR for T2, 61% and 43% overall survival at 10 years, and the disease-specific survival was over 67% for T2 and 60% for the whole cohort. And no cystectomy was done for treatment-related morbidity. And on MD analysis, the clinical E stage and the CR were associated with improved overall survival and disease-specific survival. Whether concomitant chemorad versus radiotherapy, this was done an update, but it started in 2001. And of course, radiotherapy is inferior to concomitant chemo radiation. Radiation therapy dose and technique, we are now moving for more conformal technique. Whether to give, in the UK, they use only 64 and 2 grade to the bladder only, no pelvic irradiation, and twice per day using a hyperfractionation or a accelerated hyperfractionation regimen is done in the most of the RTG trials. This is how to delineate the bladder and the small pelvic field, taking away most of the gut to decrease the GI toxicity. And this is the portal that is being treated. As you can see, if you want to treat the pelvic nodes, much of the gut will be irradiated, but what about bladder-only irradiation? And what if we use a partial bladder irradiation also to augment the role of radiotherapy so long the rubber recurrence is in the range of 10%? Again, to counterbalance for the hypoxia that takes place in the year 2003, people have been using or thinking of using the carbogen plus nicotinamide for hypoxic sensitizers, and in the year 2013, a phase 3 randomized trial using carbogen to counterbalance the effect of necrosis, because necrosis means hypoxic cells, means poor radiation output. And we can see that not the TRBT did benefit the patients, but the necrosis was of benefit, and the concordant of TIS, which is the in situ component. So these two things were affected overall survival, addressing the question of how to combat the hypoxia, which is evident by necrosis. This is to show you how the necrotic patients, bladder patients did less, and then after correction with the nicotinamide and carbogen, they fared better. So the quality of life studies, as we said, the rationale is not to alter the quality of life. The RTG pooled analysis at 5 years, they had only 6% late complications, more than grade 3 GU toxicity, 2% only more than grade 3 GI toxicity, and less than 1% of patients require cystectomy. And 36 and 18 reported normal or weak erections. Again, on multivariate analysis, combined modality treatment had better bowel quality of life and equivalent urinary quality of life compared to radical cystectomy. And now there is a bladder cancer advocacy network that are addressing, helping the patients and the survivors and funding any research for bladder cancer. What is the goal in Egypt? In Egypt, we have a recent update, which is done by Professor Dr. Hussein Khalid and colleagues, about from 5 main centers all over Egypt, and we have bladder coming as 13 or 14% after the liver. Again, this is our institutional NCI database, and here in the last 2010, the liver and the bladder are coming equal. Again, urinary bladder comes second with 14 or 15%. So it is a magnitude of problem. The issue that we are having better transitional cell carcinoma patients than the squamous cell carcinoma, which used to be accompanied with schistosomiasis and fibrosis and less effect of radiotherapy on it. So the development of the justifying the bladder preservation in Egypt was done to reduce the occurrence and severity of schistosomiasis, the high percentage of cell carcinoma, using hyperfractionation and possibility of dose escalation and predict the ultimate response, and using radiosensitizing platinum and gemcitabine. This work has been done by our late Professor Dr. Hassan Awad, Professor Dr. Hussein Khaled, Professor Dr. Nadia Mukhtar, Professor Dr. Hassan Amidi, Dr. Anwar Zaki, Professor Dr. Ashraf Zaghloul, me, and my colleague Amr Gaber. We accrued almost 110 A patients, T2 and 4A patients, refusing or medically unfit for cystectomy. We did combat infection after a maximum TURBT, a trial of maximum TURBT, because we have patients with more than 5 centimeter tumor size, and we give a hyperfractionation regimen, GemCis, then evaluate the response and continue up to 69 or 71 grade. The age cohort was 57%, 60 to 65. Performance status, Karnofsky, 80 and 70 contributed more than 90% of our cohort group, and 63% were unfit, and 27 were only refusing, with a ratio of 2 to 1. Tumor size, we had almost half of our patients with more than 5 centimeter, and maximum TURBT was only done for 32% of the patients. We did a biological, with the Professor Dr. Nadia Mukhtar, examination for P53 and RBG and KRAS for the local control and the Euroglycan and CK time for the toxicity. And out of the 160 evaluable patients, we have 5 discontinuation, 33 deaths, remission rate ranging from 9 to 84, median follow-up of 60 months, and overall CR was 54 for the transition cell component, 60, and 42 for the squamous cell component. This is to show you how the bladder capacity after treatment, and how the CT is showing very good response. Treatment outcome for transition cell carcinoma. Treatment outcome, again for transition cell carcinoma. The issue that we have CR for a patient with squamous cell but with a brain metastasis at 38 months. Again with the transition cell carcinoma in CR but with lung metastasis. So this was the overall survival at 5 years, around 40% of the whole group. And again for those with CR, we had 73% at 5 years. And the age, performance status was confound variables. Those refusing were better than those unfit. The D stage was T2 better than T4 as usual, and the TR, maximum TR, was better than the less than maximum TR. The P53 overexpressed showed bad, and the complete responders definitely were better than the partial responders. The quality of life of our patients, 2 superficial relapses were managed, 5 invasive relapses, 3 salvage cystectomy, and 2 refused to match by chemotherapy. And we had the 48% died at follow-up. The salvage chemo was for disease progression who were unfit for surgery. Distant metastasis rate is again around 28%, 24 for the TCC and 17 for the squamous cell carcinoma. 95% of the CR patients were continent. Bladder function was improved or unchanged. Few patients reported compliance, and this is the quality of life of our patients. Most of them were happy with the continent bladder. Again, another study from Garbia, which comes second in population, and who also have got a very good cancer registry. They selected patients with a group of TCC less than 65 years of age, 76 of the cohort. Performance status 80 to 184, T2, T3, no T4 disease were taken, and T size less than 73 centimeters, 75% of the cohort, low grade 70%, and the Bilharzia were only 22%. They gave me adjuvant 3 cycles of GemCis and followed by radiotherapy plus cisplatin, and they have a CR rate of 78%. And the distant metastasis was again 24% for the patients with initial CR, and the 5-year disease-specific overall survival for the CR was 75 and 62 for all patients, while for the overall survival, again 54 for all patients. So the bottom line is that bladder preservation therapy for muscle-invasive bladder cancer is a reasonable option for patients seeking an alternative to cystectomy medically unfit for surgery, grade 3B. Cisplatin in conjunction with radiation improved operational control, grade 2A. Mitomycin plus 5-fluorouracil is an alternative. Patient candidate for bladder preservation, concomitant chemoradiation rather than radiation following maximum TURBT is the standard of care, 1B. Non-complete responders or relapsed should be managed by salvage cystectomy, and quality of life parameters showed better results in favor of bladder preservation, with more than 15% of patients retaining native bladder at 5 years. Some questions that are not answered yet, whether the use of neoadjuvant followed by concomitant followed by adjuvant is of benefit or no. Dose escalation by partial radiotherapy, by brachytherapy, yes or no. Targeted or immunotherapy, which might be covered by Professor Grunwald. And whether to give preoperative chemoradio with partial cystectomy as the rationale in breast conservative treatment, to go for bladder conservative treatment or no, questions are not yet answered. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Rehab Hamid, for this excellent presentation, and I think the floor is open for one or two questions. So before we start the start, Dr. Munir. Dr. Munir, yeah.
Survival.
So microphone.
Salvage surgery.
The survival after salvage surgery, this is the overall survival for any cohort that was included in the study. Because the overall survival means that if the patient relapsed and surgery was done, then the overall survival, we are speaking about 50% at 10 years, or 40%.
Is this free survival?
No, this is overall.
Yes.
May I ask you, Dr. Rehab, in patients with invasive bladder cancer preservation, it's better to select the ELICase T2.
Yes.
But in case of T-cell, you include T3 and T4. How can you make sure that your maximum TUR or your resection through the system?
As mentioned in the literature, most of the cystoscopies are done and it's said the visible TURBT. So you can do an MRI to delineate whether there is a definite bladder wall infiltration or no, or you can go for a deeper biopsy when you go for restaging if the patient is a T3 or T4, fit for surgery and initially refusing, and then if he has got a residual disease, he has to go for definite surgery. So MITE imaging or MITE, which is the interim assessment, which is after phase 1, you can go for cystoscopy to verify the patient is in definite CR or no.
Some patients having impaired renal function, so you replace cisplatin, you use carboplatin, or you check to the mitomycin part?
Whether you can use a carboplatin, as we have stated, most of the patients who are medically unfit, you might find patients with impaired renal function who shifted to carboplatin rather than cisplatin.
Yes, Dr. Rahman?
In case the patient is accepting this type of therapy, he's not refusing the cystectomy, and you are offering this bladder preservation as an alternative option. Does the histology make any difference? For example, if a patient is eligible for surgery and he may go for surgery, would you advocate the bladder preservation, or the histology of squamous precludes this effect?
As we have shown that the pathology of squamous is not a hinder, because we had a 42% CR, and these patients were having mostly more than 5 centimeters, and the squamous cell component, either in the head and neck, by chemoradiation, you have a response. So whether the squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder behaves differently than squamous cell carcinoma elsewhere by chemorad is debatable. It has to be studied on the biological panel. And I don't think that we can offer mainly for transition cell at the moment, but for our cohort, based on our study, for those who are medically unfit or debating surgery at the moment, we might offer him radiation plus chemo, and on the expense, if he did not achieve CR, he should go for surgery.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Rehab Khalid, because we are short of time, so we will have to shift it.
Our next speaker is Professor Hussein Khalid. He's going to talk about ADT versus chemotherapy plus ADT as initial treatment for advanced prostatic cancer. Professor Hussein.
Chairman. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Before starting my presentation, I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to speak in this very important event. And what I'm going to do today in the coming 20 minutes is to speak about the role of adjuvant of androgen deprivation treatment versus androgen deprivation treatment and chemotherapy, a new fashion in the treatment of prostatic cancer. Of course, we know that prostate cancer is one of the very important cancers worldwide, where it is the second most common cancer among males, as you can see here, with a relative frequency of 11.7%. And we know that patients can be represented by local regional disease in the gland or metastatic potential in the lymph nodes or in the bones. For stage 1 and 2 disease, we usually treat the patients with radical prostatectomy or irradiation, and for stage 3, we may add adjuvant hormonal treatment. But for stage 3 and 4 and for relapsing cases, hormonal treatment is the mainstay as a beginning, and usually 85% of patients respond to hormonal treatment and 15 fail to respond, but ultimately all the patients will become hormone refractory. This is very important before discussing the subject. The endocrine axis in prostate cancer starts with the hypothalamus anterior pituitary axis, where the LH, RH are secreted, and then go to the testis and adrenal cortex, and then development of a tumor and the prostate. And usually the main weapons started by LHRH, by doing orchiectomy and by giving an anti-androgen. But in the mid-80s, there were the theory of a complete androgen blockage, and later on, relapse again occurred due to the development of tumor androgens. So for castration-naive prostate cancer, androgen deprivation therapy is the standard of care since decades. And this is being done by orchiectomy, GnRH agonist or antagonist. And most patients have profound PSA decline, but median failure-free survival is around only 1 year. For those patients, and starting in the year 2004, two important pivotal studies were done, and the standard of care for castrate-resistant prostate cancer changed from giving mitoxantrone prednisone to using docetaxel prednisone based on these very important phase 3 clinical trials. The one which is called TAX 327 compared docetaxel giving every 3 weeks versus docetaxel giving every week versus mitoxantrone. All the 3 lines also received prednisone as 10 milligram. And as you can see from this figure, the docetaxel giving every 3 weeks were better in terms of overall and disease-free survival. So the standard of care changed to docetaxel in castrate-resistant prostatic cancer, and then many lines came through to the degree that in this year the Canadian Urology Association put these guidelines for patients having prostate cancer, where castrate-resistant prostate cancer without metastasis, the choices included secondary hormonal therapy or screen for metastasis based on PSA level. And for metastatic castrate-resistant prostate cancer with minimal or no symptoms, the field includes abiraterone, enzalutamide, and docetaxel. And for those with castrate-resistant prostate cancer metastatic and having symptoms. The standards is docetaxel and radium-223. Post-docetaxel, then the floor is open for clinical trials and for other agents. Now, why came the idea of giving androgen deprivation treatment plus chemotherapy as frontline and castrate-resistant prostate cancer? First, because it's not a new idea. This was present since a long time, as you can see here, from these studies that started in the mid-70s and the 80s, where many lines of treatment, combined hormonal treatment and chemotherapy were given, but unfortunately the results were dismal, and this mainly was because there was no effective chemotherapy in the mid-70s and 80s. The second, we need to define how early is early. Is it early when we have metastatic disease, or when we have metastatic hormone-sensitive disease, or when we have metastatic castration-resistant disease? I think the relief is when we have metastatic hormone-sensitive disease. If so, what is the rationale of combining androgen deprivation treatment and chemotherapy? It is like any other systemic treatment. The requirement for this is we have unmet need. We have a biological rationale for multi-targeted strategy. We have effective and feasible systemic therapy, and we have a need for appropriate patient selection, and lastly, there must be a randomized clinical trials with adequate sample size. Let us go with those 5 one by one. Is there a need for this because it is unmet need? Yes. Because if you see this figure, this is the ultimate survival of patients with metastatic prostate cancer, not more than 20% long-term survival. Is there a biological rationale for multi-targeted strategy? Yes, there is. The mechanism of castration resistance include clonal selection, molecular adaptation, where the androgen receptor have gene amplification or mutations. There is also alteration in survival pathways by passing the androgen receptor. In addition to this, there is some theories that docetaxel, in addition of having or blocking cell division, they are impairing the androgen receptor signaling in prostatic carcinoma. Thirdly, is there a treatment that is effective and feasible for those patients? Of course, we know this from the TAX and from the other randomized study that docetaxel is effective as a systemic second-line treatment. Fourthly, how can we appropriately select patients? There are many studies, about 4 studies, that can classify patients according to the burden of the tumor, according to the extensive level of metastasis, presence or absence of visceral lesions, low tumor burden and high tumor burden, and so we can safely subdivide patients into high risk and low risk patients. And lastly, is there a randomized trials with adequate sample size? Now we have 3 studies. We are going to go through these 3 studies. We started by the SHARP-TED study that was published in the ASCO of last year by Sweeney et al., where chemohormonal therapy versus androgen ablation were randomized for extensive disease. And this is the performance status, and other factors. And then randomization was done between the two arms, where androgen deprivation treatment plus docetaxel were given versus androgen deprivation treatment alone. And then patients were re-evaluated. Here, it is important to define what is the high volume of disease, and this was defined as visceral metastasis and or four or more bone metastasis, at least one beyond the pelvis and vertebral column. According to the charted study that was published last year, there was a great difference in survival between those having androgen deprivation treatment versus those having androgen deprivation treatment plus docetaxel, with a median survival difference of about 17 months between the two arms. When the authors segregate the patients into high volume and low volume, again we find the difference were highly significant for those having high volume disease compared to those having low volume disease. The toxicity also, according to the authors, were minimal, where it was mainly febrile neutropenia, and there is significant impact on nerves in about 1%, whether sensory or motor, and the treatment-related disease was only one among the 397 patients receiving docetaxel and androgen deprivation treatment. So what was the problem? The problem was there was, after this, a French study with a similar design containing about 300 patients called GTAC-15 study that showed no survival difference, and this was in the GU symposia of the ASCO in February this year. And as you can see here, the randomization were done between androgen deprivation treatment docetaxel versus androgen deprivation treatment alone. And you see here the survival difference was not significant between the two arms. This made a problem for the results of the Shutter study. But there was possible explanation for the difference between the two studies that could include smaller sample size. They would include only more than 300 patients compared to the other study, which was more or less double the number of patients. Also, there is a lower percent of patients with high tumor volume, and they were following different subsequent treatments. So, what was the solution for this problem of the Shutter study? The solution came from the STAMPEDE study that was published this year in the ASCO in June. And in this STAMPEDE study, the patients were divided into 4 arms: the standard of care versus standard of care plus zoledronic acid versus standard of care androgen deprivation, of course, treatment, and docetaxel. And the 4th arm included standard of care plus zoledronic acid plus docetaxel. And each arm contained around more than 500 patients, except the arm with standard of care that included around 1,000 patients. And in this STAMPEDE study, there was a clear-cut survival benefit for adding docetaxel to the androgen deprivation treatment as frontline in castrate-resistant prostate cancer. This was clear from the numbers. You see here this is a survival difference with a p-value of 0.003, favoring the use of docetaxel plus standard of care or androgen deprivation treatment. So what is the take-home message of this lecture? Docetaxel improves clinical progression-free survival in metastatic prostate cancer. The overall survival is improved in G-Shutter, but not in the French GTAG-15 study. But again, it showed a difference in the Stampede study. The higher benefit was very clear for high volume metastatic patients. But we have to take care of the toxicity of giving docetaxel as frontline. And now there are many trials testing new endocrine agents which are ongoing. For my personal view, if I see a patient like this, I would suggest giving, if low volume disease as defined by the Charted study, low volume, I don't give docetaxel frontline, but for high volume disease, I give docetaxel and androgen deprivation. By this, I finished my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Hussein. Any questions, please, for Professor Hussein? Okay, Dr. Magnus.
The concept of combining hormonal and chemotherapy was not palatable or accepted in breast cancer patients due to the incidence of increased thrombosis. Do you think this applying this in male patients with metastatic prostate cancer, having the same risk factor, could be accepted or can be done without such side effects? Because we did the last trials that showed the standard trial showed that improvement in overall survival, progression-free survival, and we didn't see the pattern of toxicity.
For far many years ago, I still remember that we didn't use tamoxifen plus chemotherapy in breast cancer because they said at that time that tamoxifen is a cytostatic agent while chemotherapy is a cytotoxic agent. And this concept was proved by many trials. But ultimately, you have to be sure by the theoretical fact by doing a clinical trial. And these 3 studies, which include more than 2,000 or 3,000 patients, I think that the floor is open for using the combination of chemotherapy and hormonal treatment.
Okay, yes, please.
Thank you, Professor Hussein, for this nice presentation. Is it better to start upfront with the combination therapy or to make it sequential? This is my first question. For example, if they fail the androgen deprivation therapy, they may shift to the chemotherapy. And the difference in most of these trials is in the range of 11 or 12 month application in the front line. So this is my first question. So they go with the second or the
based on these data, I personally favor using androgen deprivation treatment alone in low volume metastatic disease and using or adding docetaxel together with androgen deprivation treatment in high volume metastatic disease. But this is for if you have the scientific or academic background. But if you have the economic background, then the floor is open according to the cost of the treatment given to such patients. I don't think that there would be a problem of starting docetaxel plus androgen deprivation treatment because we still have many other new molecules that could be used in those patients relapsing or resistant to the frontline. I would favor not using them both together if I don't have second or third or fourth line of treatment due to other reasons, economic reasons, or patients' performance status.
My second question is that most of these trials have started early on when the newer hormonal therapies were not yet available in the market, abiraterone, enzalutamide, and each of these drugs may add in the range of 8 months or even higher in the overall survival. So if patient fails androgen deprivation, then they go for this abiraterone or enzalutamide, and they give almost 1 year addition to the androgen radiation without going for the chemotherapy. So would we still go upfront with the high volume, with the docetaxel, or we give androgen deprivation? Then if it fails, we give enzalutamide, then we give amliteron, and at the end we go for the chemotherapy.
Well, it's controversial. You can you tailor the treatment of your patient according to the needs of every patient. But so far, this is the very up-to-date literature about this one. And maybe this changes in the future, I don't know. But now, I think if you go by guidelines, then this could be the way to treat the patients. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Professor Yasin Khalid. Shukran jazeelan.
So we are moving forward with Dr. Victor Grunwald from Germany. Sequencing systemic target treatment in RCC first, and he's going to continue with immunogenicity cancers, and we are going to have questions after the speech. Dr. Grunwald, please.
So, good afternoon, everybody. First, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me for today's talk, actually, because I think it's a great opportunity for me to come to Egypt, which is my first time. And I will do the talk differently because I wasn't aware I would have two topics, basically. So I will do one topic, and I also added some immune oncology treatment, basically, in that same talk. Slides, please. Thank you. Okay, so it's a privilege for me to be here with you, and RCC treatment is one of my favorites. That is why I actually talk about this, and something that we've seen during the past decade is really a phenomenal development of treatment options in RCC. So this is the past 10 years that we were facing in RCC, and look what we've gained. So we started off actually with TKI data in 2005 for sorafenib, followed by sunitinib temsirolimus in 2006, bevacizumab in 2007, and then we started off embarking on late-stage refractory patients, second and third line with everolimus. Then again, another TKI was kind of resolved into first line, and then exited into second line, and finally, in this year, it's nivolumab and cabozantinib. So it's 9 in total, basically. So almost every year we had a new agent coming in into a small market of oncology, basically. So I will try to put that into perspective and on how to sequence this. So what have we gained? And remember the days when we used cytokines to treat our patients? So this is an OS, which is roughly about 13 months. That's where we started, actually, with these kind of agents. And these are the trials that we've performed during the past decade. And this is first line, and down here is second line. And what you see depicted here is basically overall survival in the pivotal trials. And something you see on your right-hand side is the hazard ratio and the p-value. And something that you pinpoint easily is that we barely have data that shows overall survival benefit, except for temsirolimus in the poorest patient population, which is here, and one trial in the second line, intersect, where we're not quite sure what happened here, why we have a positive outcome here. But anyhow, overall, we do not have trials that will tell you A is better than B in terms of overall survival when it comes down to targeted therapies. And something that you see is that, in first line you would have a progression-free survival that accounts for 8 to 11 months in PFS. But looking into your overall survival expectation, which is about 30 months, you kind of really ask the question, what happens after the first line failure? And how does it really contribute to the outcome that we see today, which is 30 months in overall survival benefit? And to me, it is the sequencing, it is the continuous exposure of patients to a given and active regimen throughout the course of the disease. And having talked about data, I mean, the question is for you in the real practice is really how do you extract what you see here in these curves coming from the data and put it into your patient. So is that a patient that would be better treated with a given regimen, A, B, C, D, whatever, you name it, and how do you accomplish that? And having said that, I mean, there are multiple options. So this is first line, so this is here the COMPAR study, the biggest study we've done so far in RCC, or would you go with BAF interferon, or is it the poorest patient, you could use temsirolimus, for instance. And there's also the German switch trial, which suggests that there is more or less similar efficacy in terms of complete progression-free survival. Is sorafenib an option? Could be. And in order to sort that out, we really follow basically the guidelines. And because the guidelines are based on the data that we have available, you will see similar players in first line. So these are first line options by the Urology Association and the Medical Oncology Association in Europe. And basically, you see whatever you use, it's being depicted here. Sunitinib, pazopanib, BAF interferon, or temsirolimus, and the same players are listed here. Something that very, very differ is really when it comes down to arguing, how strong is the recommendation? Is it A? Is it B? So there's something that is different. And in terms of options, we have a different favor for certain things that are also possible, as it is for sorafenib, for instance. And something that we see over all those trials that we've performed is that really with the TKIs, we face a plateau phase. So whatever TKI you use, it's not going beyond the stretch of 1 year of progression-free survival. And that is depicted here in different trials. It's cross-trial comparison. So, but it really gives you an idea that with the current options that we have available in place, it's saturated. So if you want to make an advancement, it has to be novel. It needs to be different from what is currently available. And the question is there room for a better TKI, for better VEGF inhibitor in RCC? Prior to having seen the data from ECHO, I would have said no, I don't think so, but I think the floor is now again open for the discussion. And one good example for that is really COMPARS, because it compared two different TKIs which are pretty much alike, sunitinib, pazopanib. This is the progression-free survival curve. So you see that. Do you think there's any difference? It's a non-inferiority study, so therefore we can conclude this is equivalent, but it's not inferior in that case. And something that really is different is the toxicity profile. So looking into AEs will tell you, despite having more or less similar efficacy, it is different in terms of tolerability. So these are CTC AE scores for common side effects, and I marked for you those that are quite common. So, for instance, fatigue or hand-foot syndrome, which are different. So with pazopanib, you will have less fatigue and hand-foot syndrome than the sunitinib, for instance. And the same is true for mucosal inflammation. So different ways to approach this and to look at this. So in principle, people have similar outcome, but the variance and the toxicity is different between those two AEs. And another way to look into that is looking for patients that have discontinued treatment for toxicity. So this is in the appendix of the pivotal trial in the New England Journal. It tells you that if you have a AE that leads to discontinuation of pazopanib, it mainly is liver enzyme related, so liver toxicity. In the case of sunitinib, it really is hematological toxicity, which is quite surprising, but that's how it is in that trial. It's 1,100 patients. So again, telling you the story, it's not exactly the same type of medicine that we give our patients here, despite having similar results. Then something that I tend to show quite often is the PISA study in that sentence, because I think it really teaches you something on how we assess quality of life in our patients. So PISA is a study where patients have been offered 3 months of sunitinib and 3 months of pazopanib, and then